Hello, welcome back, everybody, to the Neuroinclusion Conversations Across the Pond and Beyond podcast. I'm Pasha Marlowe here with Atif Chaudhary. And today we're going to be talking about mental health and neurodivergence and neurodiversity. And in the context of it being May 2026, Mental Health Awareness Month in some parts of the world, Mental Health Awareness Week in some parts of the world. And so we wanted to make sure we have a discussion about mental health and neurodiversity. How are you, Atif?
Pasha, I'm fine. Yeah, and everyone listening, I'm fine. Thank you very much. Yes, it's Mental Health Awareness Week in the UK. Yeah, I'm Atif Chowdhury. I like to think most of you folks know me, but if not, and you're tuning in for the first time, I'm the CEO of Calling All Minds. I'm a long-term campaigner for what I like to call just healthy participation. Really, what that means is a world where, in my lifetime, it won't be achieved, but in my lifetime, it's devoted to recognizing what does that look like? How do we get a world without barriers? Can we? Perhaps not in my lifetime, but certainly can I do enough for a generation after me? And are we here really to talk about people with neurodiversity, people with disabilities? Maybe, but I think we're much here to talk about disablement and
Mm,
how do we get to a space that recognizes the world learns differently, thrives differently, and feels differently. Um, that's a little bit about me.
beautiful. And of course, you're in the UK and I'm in the US, and the cultural differences there we'll definitely bring up. And for those that don't know me, I am a global neuroinclusion speaker, but I've also been a mental health professional for 32 years now. And so it's interesting because I was trained as all therapists and psychologists and doctors and psychiatrists, at least in my country, are with the pathology paradigm, the medical model. And I've moved away from it consciously towards the neurodiversity paradigm and the social model. But it's such a fascinating dynamic to have to work within the systems of the pathology paradigm to get people the resources and sometimes the medication they need or the support that they need while thinking in the neurodiversity paradigm and acting in it as much as possible. It's so we're in a bit of a messy middle right now,
Mm.
um, in that sense. Um, but before coming on the call, we had talked about the DSM, or the Diagnostic Statistics Manual, which is kind of like the Bible of disorders. And unfortunately, every lived experience in this manual ends in disorder. And as a therapist, what I was required to do before I switched over to coaching, because I just couldn't do it anymore, was listen to somebody's experience, even like, let's say, in trauma or in grief or in shame or anxiety, and I had to give them a diagnostic code in order to get insurance or medication or continued resources, and they always ended in disorder. And that's subjective, like disordered according to who and what sense of order and who determined this. And so it never felt aligned. And yet I was working within it to try to help people in the best, as to my capacity as best as I could. And I think a lot of therapists and doctors and psychiatrists are struggling with that right now. And in Mental Health Awareness Week, I think it's really important to name that even though our systems and societies often work within the pathology paradigm in the medical model, that we don't have to think about people that way or talk about people that way. So I
Mm.
never say ASD or autism spectrum disorder. I say autism. I never say bipolar disorder or grief disorder, for example. I just say bipolar or grief.
Mhm.
It doesn't need the pathology and the stigma behind it.
Absolutely. Culturally, socially, and humanely, you're right.
Hmm.
But the system, this is
Yes.
really important. This is really the heart of this conversation.
Yes.
The system requires a deficit disorder in order to action a change.
Hmm.
And that is true in the UK.
Hmm.
And I think it's very much even more so true in the US.
Hmm.
Um, that a deficit disorder becomes a legal imperative to then to act on something. Now, my challenge to you and I think it's important that we challenge ourselves first, as well as the audience, and then superstructures around our audiences, the governments we have, and the medical model and the practitioners, of which so many practitioners also feel the same way as Pasha and I. So the provocation here is, can we drop the disorder? I know that we can as individuals, and I'm enriched in my life with people who just say, hell yeah, absolutely. But the system and the
Hmm.
structures are still demanding a deficit. They're still saying, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Not what's wrong with you?
I would love it if it turned to, because we're not saying people don't have needs. We're not saying people don't experience disability and challenges.
Mm.
Disorder is more of a judgment. Needs,
Mm.
neutral. Disability, neutral. And so, if there's a learning disability, fine. If there's needs, support needs, fine. But I feel like that's the direction I would like things to go is more, this is your lived experience. These are your access, support, or sensory needs. This is your disability. And then
Mm.
and then that's far more humane
Yeah.
and less stigmatizing and less pathologizing. So I would love it if the whole system switched to a needs-based system.
Yeah, yeah, and ultimately that's the moment of truth because that's actually what we truly have here, a civil society with the variations of human beings and human compassion. I would always said, and those of you who've listened to the podcast before will probably remember this, but I've always said that human experience is that we are all neurodiverse. It'd be honestly, it would be a shame if we weren't, but it's joyful to say that we are. We are all neurodiverse, but we're not all marginalized because of it.
Yes.
So that's the work to do. If I say from my own experience, I'm 52 now, and in my heart, I knew I was dyslexic, 13, and in my heart, I was desperately scared to confront that.
Mm,
And I was very worried that if I do confront it, it turns out I'm not. What am I?
mm,
You know?
mhm,
And what am I sounded very dark. Like
mhm,
I'm just not bright. I'm not deserved. I'm not intelligent. So those are the things that would go in the minds of a young 13-year-old going through life. I'm not alone in that, 13-year-old. We're looking at cases of self-harming in young teenagers, a sense of self-doubt and concern and care, and that whether they deserve things. It was 29 before I got a diagnosis, but that's okay. That's okay. I filled that with fire and lots of goodness since then. But if I look at the piece of paper itself, that piece of paper says SPLD, means
mm,
specific learning difficulty. I'm
mhm,
a CEO, I'm fairly accomplished on a number of things. I actually have a piece of paper that says I have a specific learning difficulty.
mhm,
Now, my question to the room and the audience is, brown folks, we got other stuff to deal with. Do we want an extra thing
mm,
that says you don't belong somewhere?
mm.
Probably not. So when we look at neurodiversity, do we see healthy participation from marginalized communities? That's a question to the audience, but I would say no.
Mhm.
And do you blame us for not showing up with labels and diagnostics if such labels are based on deficits and disorders?
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what
Di
what to do?
yeah. Diagnosis and disclosure both intersect with privilege, which is why we always bring intersectionality into the conversation. For many people, a diagnosis is validation and relief of, oh, there is something going on that I couldn't pinpoint, and now there's a name, and then they can take that and for some people, incorporate it into their identity, or for some people, just look for resources and community. But for a lot of people, there's a grieving. This is what I experience with my clients a lot. And my ADHD and autism diagnosis didn't come till I was 50. So for 50,
And
more than half my life, I assume, unless I'm very fortunate, I assumed I wasn't intelligent. I just assumed I didn't get the rule book that everyone else got, and my parents reiterated that, unfortunately. And so getting the diagnosis for me was relieving, but I will say that the grieving of Had anyone in my life, parents, teachers, otherwise, showed some awareness or compassion or offered choice and agency rather than shame and judgment, how much less suffering I would have experienced. Um, and I also come from a lot of privilege. Like I wasn't punished or there weren't negative consequences for me, little quiet white girl with pigtails in the back of the room who just didn't understand. I wasn't punished. I was, you know, excluded a lot socially, but we were talking about intersectionality and also the school to prison pipeline. And the more intersecting marginalized identities somebody has, the more there are consequences or punishments for the symptoms or the lived experiences or the innateness of a person. And that's where I think it's such a that we need to change that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Hmm.
I mean, drop the disorder isn't so this is really important. The audience listens to it's not just a case of that there are well-meaning practitioners or really courageous ones, because that would be true in many places and systems. But the entire framework in which us as well-meaning practitioners work in is still disorder-based.
Yeah.
And that's a hell of a thing to sit with, you know,
Mhm.
to think. So my invitation and my wish is that we are both in our 50s. So we cannot achieve this really, perhaps in our lifetime. You know, and that's a hell of a thing to think about as well. But we can plant the seeds,
Yes.
you know, and we can look for. So how does it work? Can you, Aaron Pasha's question for you I guess as a practitioner and the work that you do, and a question for me back. Can we actually work? Famously said by Audre Lorde, the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house.
Yes.
This was really about, famously said about racism and structures of racism.
Hmm.
The same applies here. Can we use an incomplete system and a deficit disorder system and tweak it to be better? Or do we rehaul it entirely?
Hmm.
Go forward.
That is a big question, Atif. I mean, I believe we will be navigating both for quite some time, right? We want to work towards a strength-based approach and less deficit-based. And yet, when I speak to businesses, their immediate question is, what are the challenges of people who are neurodivergent who enter the workplace? I said, okay, let's switch that. Here are the strengths and some of the unique benefits of it, but also then there's also that nuance of to not call it superpowers or to not exploit or to not deny challenges. Like we don't want to deny challenges or disabilities or needs, but we also want to be strength based and not talk about deficit. So it's a quite a nuanced conversation where we
Yes.
honor both, I think.
Let's put ourselves in the minds of a funder, for example, a government or a funder.
Uh-huh.
And a funder says, I'm here to give money to those in need.
Hmm.
What
Hmm.
you're telling me is it looks like this guy doesn't have needs. I said, no, they have needs. Okay. Sounds like they have a lot of needs. Okay. So that's not a disorder? I said,
Hmm.
no, it's not a disorder. Okay, what is it? And
Hmm.
let's go back to here we are going to persuade that funder, give us these millions that are needed to get this right. Now, how do we do that?
I talk about designing systems. I talk about
Good.
assuming everybody has needs. Doesn't matter if they identify as neurodivergent, disabled, neurotypical, doesn't matter. Everyone has access, support, and sensory needs. And then I say, how can we proactively, because you don't want to wait for a problem, wait for a conflict, wait for a lawsuit, wait for a disclosure, even. Um, Rather, can we proactively create an environment that accommodates
Yeah.
needs, assuming there will be, because there are. And if we come from that design perspective in a proactive sense, I feel like then we're not going to do as much. I'm probably not retrieving the right word, whether it's like damage control or cleanup, after a conflict. There'll be less conflicts around it and more conversations that I think should be respectful and have shared responsibility of the person who's leading, for example, and the person who's an employee on a team. Like everyone has shared responsibility in this, and everyone's needs matter.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to go back to that, if I may play with this slightly cynical finance person.
Yeah,
Yeah. And you and I are building our business case,
yeah,
saying, okay, so it's fun, right? Because this person's saying, no, I'll give you reasons to really spend this money. You're telling me there's a return on investment here financially. I think, folks listening is we've gone past the awareness, right?
hmm
I mean, I want to articulate this really strongly. So you and I are Gen Xers,
hmm
and we're the generation that would hear under a medical model, of course, 1 in 10 is dyslexic, or 1 in 10 is maybe autistic, or 1 in 10. And then you start looking at Gen Zs, Gen Zs listening to this, you'll be like, hell no, not 1 in 10. We're like 1 in 5. That's like, great, you're 1 in 5. But again, I would question all of these things. This is kind of medical model one in, right? It's the barriers, as I would talk about in the UK context, but I talk the language of barriers that we address collectively. And Tasha talks about it in needs.
hmm
And I think it's really beautiful that they can be interchanged. So then the alphas are coming in, and the alphas are like, what is this 1 in 5? Where it is 1 in 2. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
1 in 2. Okay, then we realize all along we've kind of been applying a little bit of a nonsense, right? Because one in what? It goes back to the needs or the barriers that people just learn differently. Yes, some can mask better than others. Some facing childhood experiences that are traumatic. Yes, some are psychologically and socioeconomically locked out. Ever hearing a conversation about neurodiversity,
hmm
autism, ADHD, until perhaps sometimes they find out when they're in prison.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
others have really powerful and tired and exhausted mothers who can fight for them early. So
Mm.
it's a bit of a neurodiversity. What is it? As I'm describing it, and I hope you're hearing it, it's a bit of a lottery, you know,
Mm.
and that lottery is the social model.
hmm Yeah. What I understand, how I'm interpreting this is making sure we have a socioeconomic, political, and cultural lens in this because one person's experience of dyslexia in the UK is different from another person's experience in India. I think I've mentioned it if I haven't already. In some cultures, hearing voices is pathologized, stigmatized, discriminated against. In my country, certainly it is. It's seen as quite negative. It's seen as pathology and sometimes is labeled hearing voices, schizophrenia. It's a problem. It's a problem to be solved, a problem to be treated. In indigenous cultures, it's seen as wisdom and not a problem. And because my culture, I'll just say in the US, because the US pathologizes and stigmatizes and discriminates against hearing voices, people's the voices people hear are more negative. Like they internalize the negativity. Whereas
Yeah.
somebody who's raised in a culture where that is revered or celebrated, then their experience is completely different, but they have the same form of neurodivergence. The
Abs-
same,
abs-
right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So at this point, we're not actually even, I guess, in some ways talking about neurodiversity, although we are. We're actually talking about what is welcomed, what is safe. Are hearing voices healthy? Interesting, right? It depends on the voice. If the voice,
Right.
if the
Yeah.
voice is telling you wonderful, liberating things,
Yeah.
then why not? But you're right. It's the environment around you that might dictate what the voice sounds like. Absolutely. What was
Mhm.
once seen as shamans, and shamans would look for wisdom and I guess vision making is
hmm
now frowned upon. Yeah, no, I know. We've mentioned this before, and I'm kind of reminded that you're in the US. It's a country that, essentially, as a country, whatever we decide those to be, they are social constructs. But there is a country. It's 250 years old. It found it remarkable to me that I was like, it's only 250 years old. I thought it'd be longer than that. And it made me chuckle a bit because before Europeans came, obviously there were other people and their traditions on that land and their stories. and those voices and neurodiversity is completely wiped out of history
Mm,
until it has this little pocket here and there which might get mentioned somewhere in a little
mhm,
highlight somewhere. I think that's really important that we bring that because really is talking to our ancestors such a negative thing.
mm,
That's what we determine it to be.
mm, mhm,
And is it a disorder? Which brings us back to
mhm,
this conversation. It is mental health awareness. Well, so we are right that it's a good example because it speaks to the values. I want to give you some hope here, folks. Is that if you think about 20 years ago, there was no mental health agenda per se, right? Certainly 20 odd years ago, you could confidently say there's a health agenda if you're physically well or not physically well.
mhm,
There wasn't really a mental health agenda. Mental health meant you've been institutionalized, you know,
mhm, mhm,
or you were schizophrenic and
mhm,
such and such.
mhm,
I'm from a time where we used to, had a really bad mental health day, we'd call in work and may pretend to be physically sick. We'd do a
mhm,
fake voice. I remember doing myself. We'd do a fake voice, but actually, I am unwell, but I'm mentally unwell. Um, but you couldn't say that.
mm,
Now you can to
mhm.
certain places. Would you say?
Yes. Yes, I believe there's far less stigma around it. I don't know anyone who's mentally well right now. I don't
Okay.
understand.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I don't know if we're mentally well and fully regulated. I don't know if we're really listening to what's going on.
I would say that I know we talk about the politics and we're not shying away from that, but
No.
I won't name the names.
Yeah. But they're not
But
well either. They're
no,
not.
no, they're not well. And folks, I'm not naming it because I'm afraid of it. I'm just want us to move beyond the
It's
orange man in the high tower. But I think you're right. So wouldn't you have to be sociopathic to say you're well in a space of such disarray and discomfort right now? You know?
avoidant at the very least. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably a fair way to look at it. Very avoidant, yeah. I mean, life is political, right? Choices are political.
Yeah. It's
Mental
interesting.
well-being is political.
Sorry, I didn't mean
No,
to
no,
interrupt.
no, it's okay. It's okay.
I was just thinking about when people talk about mental health, they almost talk about it synonymously as as mental illness. It's like there is mental health. Like we can be mentally healthy and
Mm.
mentally well. But when people talk about who isn't mentally, I don't love using mental illness, but when people talk about that, I always wonder, is it a mental illness or disorder you're looking at, or is it somebody who is poor and doesn't have resources and doesn't sleep, doesn't even have a bed. And how could they be well? And why are we naming that disorder?
Absolutely. And then it brings us to because I really believe that the most disabling thing on earth is poverty.
Yes.
It's about choices, so or lack of them. So in this case, is somebody not being perhaps homeless? Wouldn't that have a mental health consequence? Of course it
Absolutely.
does.
Absolutely.
What I'm also reminded of is that I often think that we live in silos too often,
Hmm.
and we call them out. At least I know definitely good practitioners do, but we very rarely attack the foundations of them. Right? I know I'm using passionate language there of attacking, but those silos pit good people's needs against other good people's needs.
Yeah.
So we end up with what could look like the diversity Olympics,
Yes.
whose voice matters, and what's the moral panic of the day that says that matters more today than it did yesterday, and whether it matters more over other people.
Hmm.
It can be very divisive. And I also noticed that, and again, I would really love listeners to challenge Pasha and I, or just comment on it and just celebrate it. I don't know. But when we think about disabled people and about disabled experiences, barriers they face, when it comes to particularly, I think, physically disabled folks, where it's not hidden, they're very rarely involved in mental health conversations, as if being blind would have a disabling experience of mental health, you know, or being a wheelchair user. having to cost more just to move around the city because you have to use taxis. They cost more. You have no choice. And it has a higher cost of living, which puts more pressure on your budget and your existence. It's only, why would that not have a mental health impact? When we talk about Mental Health Awareness Month, those kind of stories, they're not part of
Mhm.
the conversation. They're busy being in the disability conversation. Do you know? Um,
Yes.
and I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I see that in the queer community, the LGBTQIA community. Somebody will come in, let's say a transgender person, and they'll say, I'm struggling with anxiety. And the doctor or therapist will say, well, obviously, because you're trans. And they're like, well, also I have some anxiety.
Yeah.
This isn't the
Yeah.
only thing going on in my life. If I'm in a
Yes.
wheelchair, I can be depressed about many things
Yes.
other
Yeah.
than, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's just interesting how we often, put people like in that silo or in that box. And so, yeah, as a postmenopausal woman, I can't tell you the amount of times I go into the doctor with, I think, very real, valid health issues. And oh my, I would say 90% of the time, it's you must be stressed or it's because you're menopausal.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah. Yeah.
like tumors are missed or like, like things like,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
things that are missed because you get dismissed a lot. And so
Yeah.
I think that's the experience of a lot of people who have any marginalized identity that is stigmatized because there's just this tunnel vision around it.
Yeah.
And with
Yeah.
disability, I hear a lot of people in the disability world get criticized if they use any money that they've earned or received to have pleasure or leisure or
Mhm.
fun or a vacation. Like, oh, are you using government money for that new
Wow.
car?
Wow. That's quite common in the US.
Hmm.
Wow.
Hmm.
Wow.
Like they don't deserve it, or like
Wow.
just the cynicism. There's a cynicism there.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. And that is a shame, a social shaming, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's incredible. I mean, in the UK, it's not for me to say, and I don't know if I can speak for those experiences. There is a welfare state, and there's more and more of a stigmatization. You know, for sure, it's mission creep right uncomfortably, and I suspect even more so with the change in government, particularly if will change with a government I wouldn't want to see come to power. But, but what I'm quite interested in is whether that, because like I said, maybe if I give an example, there could be folks that need time off work because of the barrier they face or the impairment, and then they're working through. So suddenly, maybe with a hidden difference like fibromyalgia, it's not unusual for people to need time off because of
Hmm.
that it has
Hmm.
or MS. But likewise, when you have a heavy head cold and it's really bad, and I might not go to work for that day, that person may, because they feel like, well, I've got to persevere. I've already taken a few days off this month, so I've got to persevere with this one. But I think, well, okay, you're actually not. You don't, this may not be the fibromyalgia, it may not be the MS, but
Hmm.
still unwell.
Yeah.
Need this time off. Um, so those things I think are quite common. The other is
Hmm.
the mental health experience of just moving around a city. You know,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
and New York is a good example, I'm sure. And Paris, I found the most accessible city I've ever been to, and
Inaccessible. Yes.
inaccessible. I mean, maybe that's really harsh. And there's probably a lot of French people. Go, oh, God, how would you say that? But I generally thought, dude, you've got money. As a city, you have money.
Yeah.
Better than this. It's awful. you know, London, yeah, it's pretty not good either, but it's got plans, really strong plans, very vocal about equity in motion and how we do this.
Mm,
It's a long plan, but I'm in a lot of those meetings to do that.
mm.
I'm not sure in America. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting because the sunflower lanyard that a lot of
Yeah.
people use for non-apparent or invisible disabilities,
Yeah.
I I have only found that useful in the UK. I've worn it in many countries, including the
Wow.
United States. I've only found it useful there, not only because there's the awareness about it, but
Yeah,
the conversation about invisible disability is very apparent, even in the subway, trains. I don't know what you call it. There,
yeah, yeah.
T, is it not the T? It's the
The tube.
tube.
Yeah, yeah,
Everyone,
yeah.
there's a invisible disability seat and sign on the bathrooms, restrooms. There's an invisible disability sign often that I saw, so that I walk into a accessible bathroom and people like, "What are you doing using that bathroom? You're not in a
Oh, wow.
wheelchair." But
Wow.
but
Okay.
they don't know that I have
Yeah.
a metal leg or I'm
Yeah.
claustrophobic or I'm breastfeeding. They don't know.
Yeah.
They don't know. And so,
Absolutely.
but in the UK, I found that there was more conversation around
Yeah, way
hidden
more.
and non-apparent disability.
That's fascinating. Again, it's going back to a country with the resources to do better. There has been a real focus in the UK to say not all disabilities are visible. That's a
Yeah.
really important thing.
Yeah.
Um, and you're dead right. There are different people. What we have is radar keys. They're very common.
Hmm.
And they will allow you to access. A big shout to Disability Rights UK, who do amazing work with the radar keys. I'm just very proud to
Hey.
thank them. But the radar key, anyone can essentially buy one. Okay.
Mm, mm.
Um, but the question really becomes: is the trust of civil society? Why would you buy one if you were going to abuse it? Well, you might do, but why would we have that
Right.
mindset? More importantly, why would we
Yes.
have that mindset? Our mindset is if you need access, then you access, right? Um, is it perfect? No, no, far from it. But but it's got to be based on trust, and I guess after poverty, I don't know if you'd agree with me, but I think the second most disabling thing in the world is attitudes. You know, and it's the attitude of who gets to deserve anything. And yeah, if you're looking at accessible toilets and someone coming out of it out of a wheelchair, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything.
Hmm. Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, wow. If that's still a big deal in the US, that's interesting. You know? That's
Hmm.
still that's still
There's
there.
the cynicism is there, not believing people,
Yeah,
assuming, of course, this is from the government and leadership. This is why we're cynical and not trusting. But
yeah,
if 38% of students in college and university here in the United States claim disability currently and need accommodations and want accommodations, that's risen a lot lately. And people immediately said they just want more time to take a test. They want their own private room or they want to get away with something. That was the immediate overwhelming response rather than believe them or what is
yeah.
happening that so many young people are feeling disabled in our country and is our country disabling?
Yes, yes, absolutely, and this goes back to the disabling situation, right?
Yeah.
Um, I know we touched on this, and we're going to talk more about disabling situations, particularly in the conflict issues of conflict and militarization and how that affects disabled people. But that's not for today. But I'm interested in the heart of this. Yeah, what is a disabling situation? And if you were listening, feel this. Close your eyes, because we're going to try and unpack something that has maybe been around for a long time. That these are experiences that happen to us. They're not who we are. Yet to get support, to get any kind of financial understanding, you have to say this is who you are rather than what is happening to you. Want to be really gentle with folks there. The example I might give is refugees, right? It's not an identity. We all think of it as an identity, but it's an experience.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's an experience. Almost what happens to you. It's
Mm,
what it's what your body
mm,
when it reacts to it. It's
mm,
traumatized because it's what happened to you.
mm,
Yeah, we act as if it's who you are.
mhm, mm,
Uh, that's really hard for folks to, especially when you're in the eye of the storm, to be able to shake that off or even reject, as we're going right to the circle of view, the pathology labels that you were scared to have, needed to have.
mhm.
recognize the weight of them, the shame of them.
Hmm.
And still today, they're not a label that experience that you experience and say, this is what's happening to me. It's
Hmm.
who I am. Anxiety disorder is a good example. Um, and what's a disabling situation? I have glasses on. Well, they're not right now, but I don't put mine on. Actually, you and I wear glasses.
Hmm.
Looks at our glasses and goes, "Oh, that person's got a disability."
Yep.
You know, and that's a good thing. But it's not the thing to focus on.
Hmm.
In truth, I couldn't drive home. I managed to do this podcast about them just so I went to rest my eyes, but I could not drive home without
Without.
my glasses. And if
Hmm.
somebody took my glasses away, I would be in a disabling situation. I
Yes.
definitely would not drive a car.
Yes.
Um,
Hmm.
and yet we don't think of glasses because glasses are part of everyday belonging.
Hmm. Hmm.
So the pursuit here, if we can, and we are the generation to debate it, but the next generation that drops the disorder is the generation that recognizes that social economics affects agency and choices, attitudes, especially about the ones we have about ourselves, choices, and deservedness. And that they are the generation that can recognize that these are things that have happened to people and happen to themselves if they can own it and
Hmm.
who they are. And to still hold that truth and say that doesn't mean we don't have needs. These are experiences, not identities.
Mm. Hmm. I think about how likely it will be that there'll be something called detainment anxiety disorder or something that like
So, yeah,
pathologizes something that's happened to people that they're impacted negatively about,
yes,
and
yeah.
and how we'll pathologize that, just like we pathologize, queerness, just like we
Yes,
pathologize
yes,
menopause,
yeah, yeah.
and so we'll label it, and then that becomes, the identity rather than experience. And I also think about how it's in terms of agency. I have trauma. I don't see trauma as my identity. It's something that happened to me, but I
Hmm.
am autistic. It's just the language is interesting, and I think it's interesting to allow people to identify as they wish and to
Hmm.
to share the language that they wish, because one person will say I am ADHD, one person says I have ADHD, and that it impacts how they think about themselves and how they want us to refer to them. And so I just think it's always good to ask people. uh
Yeah,
you
yeah, absolutely. And we absolutely because then there's healing in A being asked, and
know,
second having a space to recognize what is it to me. It doesn't have to be static. You
yeah,
know?
yeah,
I think it's really important. It is Mental Health Awareness Week. I think I'm going to just give a little bit of trigger warning because it's going to be maybe a bit sensitive. Um, but it is Mental Health Awareness Week. It's also I lost my birth mother. I was very young, so I was in care a bit. And she essentially through life and loss and she was autistic, we understand. Which is also her birthday this month, so I'm conscious of that. But it's also Mental Health Awareness Week month, and so she left us early and earlier than she should. She was just 26, you know.
mm,
But I come to think the postnatal depression and all those things. Actually, as a young woman, at the age of well, young girl actually, 5, partition happened. That meant she was displaced. She was on the run. Men with machetes were chasing human beings, and
mhm,
it was really tragic. Call it partition of India. But actually, it's the second largest genocide of the 20th century.
mm,
And human beings haven't reconciled that, and certainly not the British state, you know. And the ongoing impacts of that in terms of mental health and trauma on a generation is huge for South Asians. And it continues to be, and it continues to play out in issues or conflicts even today, be it even 70, 70 odd years afterwards, you know, be it Pakistan or Bangladesh or India or Sri Lanka. Echoes of that. What was once one giant country called India being split and people's movements. Now, I'm not bringing anything other than you have to recognize that is there an experience of what happened to so many people that is racialized justice? Is there a question around racial justice is a question around social upheaval that's political. And yet, when people are lost in that space as adults, they become sectioned under mental health acts. They really become the problem to civil society, or sometimes they leave early. Their children are in care. All of those things play a role. We understand mental health to be. We're not doing is looking at the social factors that would have affected this young mind so early. What
Hmm.
it would have done, psyche in a space of tension, anxiety, or stress. In my mother's case, 1971 happened, and stresses of seeing another war happen, which became Bangladesh or East Pakistan. So I'm really keen to look at that restorative justice
Hmm.
around mental health.
Hmm.
And if we can do that, then we can start acknowledging actually isn't a disorder, but rather a social outcry.
Hmm. Hmm.
How human beings have to navigate complex systems that they had very little say in,
Yeah.
yet they were done to them
Yeah.
at the age of 5, in just in case,
Yeah.
for me. So I'm really committed to this, and I know you are. And I guess when I'm thinking about it in the closing of today, I know I've left it in a really space, but also quite an epic one. I want to ask you, Pasha, what keeps you hopeful in this? You know, and in this space that we know that we can do this with this depth. But what keeps you hopeful knowing how real it is?
Briefly before, what keeps me hopeful is in response to everything you said, to me, I'm keep thinking accountability. Like when it's recognized as systemic, when it's recognized as social justice, there needs to be accountability. Other that isn't blaming or putting the responsibility on the individual to manage or handle. That being said, okay, what keeps me hopeful? What keeps me hopeful? What keeps me hopeful? Um, Oh, goodness gracious. This is going to sound so random, but recently I've been thinking about orca whales, killer whales, because,
Brilliant. Brilliant.
and the grandmother theory, and the fact
Yes.
that whales and mammals are the only ones who go through menopause, and why do we exist past the point of being able to reproduce, and
Yeah. Yeah.
why do whales live to be 90? Why do women live to be 90? And the wisdom and the perspective that we learned from our elders and our ancestors brings me hope because we've been in this place before and we've navigated it in many different ways. So we're not without resources or knowledge or wisdom. Um, yeah, that's what I'm with right now. The whales, the whales
Yeah.
keep me up.
Uh, I freaking love that. I just sorry, it's my favorite animal. But you weren't to know that. And also for my 40th birthday, my wife took me to Iceland
Oh,
to see orcas in the wild. Yeah, and it was just
that's
a
her
really
favorite. That's I
yeah.
did not know that about you.
No, and they're just epic. And I I just yeah. So I got a really glee when you just I didn't know you were going to go to orcas,
I did
but
not
it's
know
just
I
a,
was going
so
to
yeah.
either.
And I like that they're mad at us. That they smash boats. They go, I'm pretty mad at you guys. You know? I think I hope no one gets hurt in a boat from them. But I kind of find it amazing that there's something wild about that. You know,
That's very
and
synergistic.
yeah, yeah, and also yeah, I know what you mean about the grandmas. I don't know if folks are listening to will get that. I'd love you to explain that a little bit more, just for the folks to hear that. But you're really talking about grandmothers teaching their grandchildren, right?
Yeah.
How to hunt, how to do things. Yeah, it's great. I mean, orcas have elders.
Yes.
You know, they don't just do menopause, but they have elders in a
Yeah.
pack.
Yeah.
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 And I've seen that. The grandmothers are doing leading their matriarchs, aren't
They
they?
do. They lead the
Yeah.
salmon runs and everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same with elephants as well, though. They have the
Yes.
matriarch, you know.
Yes.
And I have a picture, Pasha. I'll send to you, and we can maybe we can put it in the comments. But it was in Kenya, and I could see all these elephants, and they were eating. As soon as I rocked up, and she was huge, but she stopped. She's looking at me, and she's letting the others eat. And they're comfortable as long as she's okay. They're gonna eat. She's just clocking me, watching me, going, "I'm not eating. I want to see what you do." And I was like, just going to take a picture and move on and let you carry on. But it was just
Oh,
amazing to say, you're a grandmother, yeah. Gra- Grandmothers lead the light to raise a generation. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, that keeps me hopeful. That
Good.
and yeah, that folks are listening and they're picking up. This podcast is getting more traction. I would love to hear more from people listening to it. Say, what does it make? What makes them hopeful about it? To know that as we do these conversations, we're never going to shy away from the realities of really what makes mental health wrong, but also what makes mental health strong. We'll keep
Mhm.
doing that. And that's really over to you folks. And thank you so much from me for listening and to be here in in the joy of this work.
Thank you, Atif. Thank you, everyone listening. And yeah, we'll see you next episode.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.